Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be teaching how to paint this watercolor landscape of the Great Smoky Mountains with the galaxy. Without further ado, let's get painting. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be using Prussian Blue, Purple, Payne's Gray, and Black by Winsor & Newton. I'm also going to be using my size 6, size 4, and size 16 round brush by Princeton. I'll also use some white Winsor & Newton gouache to add our stars to our galaxy. And then the paper I've taped down to paint with is a size 5 by 7 inches. The first thing that I want to do is lay out a wash of water, and I'm going to use my size 16 round brush and just drag some water side to side just to fully saturate the page. We're going to paint our watercolor galaxy first. And so we're going to have some gaps where we need certain parts to dry in between different stages of the painting. And the first stage is this wonderful whimsical galaxy that we're going to paint. And the first color I want to use is some Prussian Blue. And with this galaxy, I kind of want just some loose organic brush strokes, keeping in mind that for the, I would say, last 2/3 of the painting, I want to keep the color here from the transition of the galaxy to the mountain layers we'll be adding a little bit more faint. So I just applied some blue here, and then I'm just going to buff out the blue just by dragging it down. Just like that. So that way it's like a smoother transition into the mountains and not conflicting with the mountain area at all. And then for this top, I would say third, just a little over third, we will have some really vibrant saturated color. As you can see, I'm just applying irregular brush strokes, just using the belly of my brush here to get these nice vibrant values of the Prussian Blue. And I'm leaving some areas almost white, allowing some of the color just to take over and bleed. I'm going to overlap certain areas with the Prussian Blue, but I'm just getting these kind of rounded, almost circular brush strokes throughout the galaxy sky. And then towards this bottom area, I'm just going to take a wet brush with clean water and just drag it down a little bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to layer a little bit more Prussian Blue, just building and layering the saturation of color. And again, just making sure to kind of buff out this bottom area more. All right, and now I want to just take a little bit of purple, and I just want to layer some touches of the purple just to add more variety of the color in the sky. And again, I'm just doing really loose, almost circular like brush strokes and movement with my brush, leaving some of the lighter areas just blank, so that way there's some contrast of light to dark. And then I want to take a touch of Payne's Gray, which is super potent, so a little goes a very long way. It's one of my favorite, like, deep, rich colors. And again, all I'm doing is kind of layering this throughout just to give even more depth and contrast to the galaxy. And keep in mind that as the galaxy dries, or as watercolor in general dries, it does lift and value just a little bit. So you may think an area is like super dark, and then it'll just lighten up just a tad bit as it dries. So again, just keeping it super loose. All right. And then last but not least, I want some black in there. Not gonna go super crazy with the black, and it's just a notch deeper than the Payne's gray as far as value, but I do want some touches of black layered up in there. And the water is still nice and saturated on the page. If you find any colors are not quite bleeding out like you would want, I would just add some more water to your page, especially in this transition of the light to the dark. That's like more of a necessary area to have more of that water to just increase that kind of soft blend of color. All right, next, I'm just gonna rinse off my brush with some water and then just subtly buff out this transition area and just drag it down so we have a nice even saturation. And then in this area, I'm just gonna tap just some subtle amounts of Prussian Blue, just barely a hint. I just want a little bit of a softness here, like almost like a misty fog effect with the Prussian Blue. Okay. And then as your sky starts to absorb some of the paint and everything, you can go in and add a little bit more. So I'm just gonna add maybe a touch of purple here. I feel like that got a little bit lost in the mix of colors. So at this point, while it's still wet, you can just apply just a little bit more color, whether it's the purple or the Prussian Blue. All right, and I'm just gonna let this set and dry, and when we come back, we're gonna add some stars to our galaxy in addition to adding in our layered mountains below. Okay, before we start our stars, now that our sky is dry, I actually want to start the first layer of our mountain, and I'm going to use just a touch of Prussian Blue and mix it with some Payne's Gray as well. And then I'm gonna add plenty of water because I want our first layer of our mountains to be slightly watered down in value. And to start, I'm simply just going to paint a mountain silhouette. And I basically paint some jagged lines basically across in kind of a triangular shape. Some that have some variegation to them. All right, just like that. And then I'm just gonna paint a little bit of a broader brush stroke beneath that sketch. And a little bit more on this right side as well. And then before that broad brush stroke dries, I'm just going to take a plain white brush and add water all the way across, and then just drag that on down. Okay, and while this mountain layer dries, I'm going to switch gears and use the tip of my size 4 brush. And I just want to paint a few white stars in our sky. And again, I'm just using the fine tip of my smallest brush here. And I'm just going to place a few irregularly placed white dots using super, super light pressure with my hand. And then just reloading more paint as I go. But I'm just going to add some stars scattered throughout the whole sky. All right, I've waited a moment to let this first mountain layer dry, and now we can do our second mountain layer. And this one's going to be slightly darker. And with this mountain layer, I kind of want some variety, so that way it's not kind of mimicking the same shape as the one above. This one may overlap slightly just above the horizon line of the first layer. All right, and same thing as before, I'm just gonna do a broad stroke just below the first sketch line. And then I'm gonna add just a little bit more detail, just adding some irregular kind of jagged quality to the mountainscape of the shape here, just so that way it doesn't look perfect, like a perfectly smooth line. Okay, and now I can take just plain clean water with my brush and just add the water all the way across, allowing some of that color just to bleed downward into the water below. And then I'm gonna switch gears real quick to my size 16 brush just to help smooth out this transition and get some broader strokes in there. I'm gonna take my brush here and just kind of smooth out the transition. Okay, and then I'm just gonna allow this second mountain layer just to set and dry, and then we will add our last mountain layer before we move on to our trees. For our last mountain layer, I'm gonna mix some more Payne's gray into the mixture that we have, just to make it a darker blue. All right, and for this layer, I'm gonna actually start from the right, mixing it up a little bit. Gonna swoop it down, back up, and then back down. So this one's a little bit more of a simpler mountain range. And again, I'm just gonna do a broader brush stroke. Just like so, and then take some water and just go ahead and buff out this mountain layer. And I'm just allowing that nice, deep, vibrant color to just bleed downward. And I'm just gonna let this last mountain layer set. And when we come back, we can finally add our pine trees. Now that our last mountain layer here is dry, we can move on to our pine trees. And I am just going to mix up a good concentrated amount of Payne's gray with some black for our darkest color so far in value for these layers that we have here. But I want a nice good saturation of color. And I'm going to use my size 4 brush for these. Starting from the left side all the way across, I want to start to lay out my trees, but before I get going on that, I'm going to take my size 16 brush and just do about an inch of a wash of water all the way across. And towards the left side and the right side, I'm going to extend and have those areas be higher with the wash, almost like a U shape that's dipping down. Okay. And before we get going, I'm just simply gonna do a nice wide brush stroke with my size 4 brush all the way across there, just to kind of start to build our wash here that the trees are gonna just bleed into. Okay. So now I want to start to lay out our trees, and I just like to lay out our trunks first. It's just a funny habit I have. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I want to start to just lay out our trunks just by doing a simple vertical line. And I want the trunks to be different heights, so some are taller, some are quite small. Maybe make these ones a little tall on these ends. Okay, so there are the layouts of our tree trunks, and then I'm just going to smooth out another wash of that color to kind of bleed out below. And then from here, just from left to right, I'm simply going to add our finer details using our tip of our size 4 brush with really light pressure. And I'm just going to be adding really loose brush strokes. And again, just super dainty pressure with the tip of my brush. And I'm just kind of following a really loose cone shape where the top of the tree is nice and dainty. And as we get towards the bottom, it starts to widen, almost like a very tall, skinny triangle. So I'm just loosely adding these simple brush strokes on each side and just layering these up. And it's okay if your pine trees layer on top of each other quite a bit. So you shouldn't see separation between the pine trees, meaning it should be a nice, dense wall of trees. So you should not see like defined, a tree here and a gap and a tree here and a gap. It should all kind of slightly overlap amongst each other and be nice and dense. So I'm just gonna carry forth this pattern, and as the trees bleed into the wash below, I just help that out just by kind of taking my brush and doing some circular brush strokes here just to soften that blend. And I'll just carry on that technique of the trees all the way across. And that is that. I'm so happy with how this turned out, and I hope that you enjoyed this watercolor tutorial of the Great Smoky Mountains with a vibrant galaxy. Be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any further watercolor tutorials.